The Virginia sun hung low and merciless over the NATO elite training compound, casting long shadows across concrete and steel like fingers reaching for secrets. 200 of the world's finest warriors moved through the facility with the practiced efficiency of men who had earned the right to wear their uniforms. Navy SEALs, British SAS, Delta Force, German KSK, the kind of operators who turned impossible missions into footnotes in classified files. And then there was her. Scarlett Donovan stepped through the main gate carrying a worn canvas backpack that looked like it had survived 3 deployments in a house fire. 24 years old, 5'6", auburn hair pulled into a messy high bun that somehow made her look even younger than she was. Pale skin dotted with freckles across her nose and cheeks. Those striking green eyes should have commanded attention. Instead, they seemed to invite dismissal. Her gray t-shirt was wrinkled and faded. Her cargo pants had seen better decades. She moved through the compound like someone trying very hard not to be noticed, which was exactly the kind of behavior that drew every eye within 100 meters. Captain Jackson Blackwood spotted her first. At 28, Blackwood stood 6'2" of pure military arrogance. Broad shoulders that strained against digital camouflage tailored specifically to showcase his physique. Dark hair cut to regulation perfection. Jaw that looked like it had been chiseled by someone who really loved their work. He commanded attention the way some men commanded respect, and he'd built an entire career on the difference. His voice carried across the compound courtyard with the kind of projection that came from years of making subordinates feel small. "Hey, medic, where's the field hospital you got lost from?" The courtyard went quiet. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Equipment inspections paused. Every warrior within earshot turned to watch what promised to be the day's entertainment. Nothing broke the monotony of elite training quite like someone being very publicly put in their place. Scarlett stopped walking. Her fingers adjusted their grip on the backpack strap with unconscious precision. Anyone paying close attention might have noticed the way her feet positioned themselves automatically. Shoulder width apart, weight distributed evenly, center of gravity low and stable. It was the stance of someone who'd spent years learning to be ready for anything. But nobody was paying that kind of attention. Not yet. "I registered for logistics training," Scarlett said quietly. Her voice carried the gentle cadence of someone who'd learned early that speaking softly often meant people listened harder. Or didn't listen at all, depending on who was doing the hearing. Blackwood slapped his knee. The sound cracked across the courtyard like a gunshot. "Logistics." He turned to his crew voice pitched perfectly to Carrie. "Little girl, this is NATO elite training camp, not summer camp for wannabes." The laughter started small and built like a wave. Phones emerged from pockets. Live streams began to roll. In the age of social media, humiliation had become a spectator sport, and Captain Jackson Blackwood had just opened today's main event. Behind him, 3 men formed up like wolves flanking an alpha. Sergeant Trent Colburn, technical specialist, with arms covered in unit tattoos that told stories his security clearance wouldn't let him speak aloud. Corporal Wade Grayson, demolitions expert, whose grin never quite reached his calculating eyes. Private Ryan Voss, barely 21, but already carrying himself like he owned the world and was considering eviction notices for anyone who disagreed. "Who let this kid through security?" Blackwood continued building momentum with his audience. "Standards really are dropping." The crowd was growing. Elite trainees from 12 different nations were abandoning their gear checks and formation drills to witness what was clearly going to be comedy gold. Humiliation as team-building exercise. Mockery as initiation rite. Among them, a figure moved with different energy entirely. Lieutenant Paige Hartley emerged from the administrative building, auburn hair pulled back in regulation-style uniform, crisp despite the early hour. At 26, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned every promotion the hard way. No shortcuts, no special treatment, just competence recognized by people who knew the difference. When her gray eyes found Scarlett, something flickered across her features, recognition maybe, or concern, possibly even something approaching fear. But Scarlett didn't notice. She was focused on setting her backpack down with careful precision. And in that simple movement, those watching very closely might have observed something unusual. Her spine straightened without conscious effort, muscle memory so deep it had become involuntary. For just a moment, she looked less like a lost medical student and more like someone who'd spent years learning to stand ready for violence. Then the moment passed, and she was just a small woman in wrinkled clothes, clearly out of her depth. Seriously, though, Blackwood said, his voice dripping with theatrical concern. Did someone call Make-A-Wish? Because this is just sad. The laughter reached its peak. Somewhere in the crowd, someone started a betting pool on how long she'd last before crying. The smart money was on less than an hour. Nobody knew that in exactly 7 days, when that gray t-shirt was torn away to reveal a skull crowned with a queen's diadem inked in black, the entire world would understand they just witnessed the biggest mistake of their military careers. But that revelation still lay ahead. For now, there was only the mockery, and the woman who absorbed it like armor absorbing bullets. Unchanged, unmoved, apparently unaffected. The morning sun climbed higher, turning the Virginia compound into an oven that separated elite soldiers from everyone else. Master Sergeant Wyatt Brennan stood at the edge of the physical training field, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the assembled candidates with the practiced assessment of a man who'd spent 40 years identifying weakness before it became fatal. At 58, Brennan looked like he'd been carved from old leather in bad decisions. Weathered face mapped with scars that told stories his clearance level wouldn't allow. Gray hair cut military short. Posture that belonged to someone who'd learned decades ago that appearing relaxed was the best way to see everything. He'd served 28 years active duty before forced retirement in 2003. Gulf War, Somalia, Bosnia, places that didn't appear on official deployment records. Operations that never made it into after-action reports. The kind of career that ended not with parades, but with encrypted files and very specific non-disclosure agreements. Now, 15 years later, he worked as a civilian contractor, training the next generation, observing, evaluating, recording details that would be passed up chains of command he'd once been part of. His eyes found Scarlett Donovan standing in the rear rank, positioned among other support personnel, like a visual reminder that not everyone here was a warrior. Something about her bothered him. He couldn't quite articulate what. Just a feeling, an instinct developed over decades of operations, where the wrong instinct meant body bags and difficult conversations with families. Ladies and gentlemen, Brennan's voice carried easily across the assembled formation. No shouting necessary, just authority that came from knowing he was the most dangerous person on this field, and everyone else knew it too. Welcome to NATO Elite Cross Training. For the next 6 weeks, you will be challenged, tested, and pushed beyond whatever limits you think you have. He let the words settle. Let 200 elite operators absorb the promise of difficulty. Some of you will excel, some will struggle, some will fail completely and be sent home with your dignity intact, but your pride significantly damaged. His eyes swept across the formation, paused momentarily on faces he'd already identified as potential problems. The first assessment is basic physical fitness: push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and a 3-mile run. These are minimum standards for participation in advanced training. Anyone who fails any portion will be immediately recycled to basic instruction. The implication was clear. This wasn't just assessment, this was elimination. The program had no room for soldiers who couldn't meet basic physical standards, regardless of their technical specialties or administrative value. Scarlett positioned herself on the grass for push-ups, assumed the front-leaning rest position with mechanical precision. What the observers couldn't see was the way her muscle memory automatically adjusted her hand placement to optimal position for maximum efficiency. Her form was textbook perfect. But more than that, it was the form of someone who'd done thousands of push-ups in conditions where failure meant consequences far worse than recycling to basic training. She completed 118 repetitions without visible strain, breathing controlled and steady throughout the exercise. A performance that put her in the top 10% of the group despite being categorized as support personnel. Brennan noticed, in 40 years of training, soldiers, he developed an eye for the difference between someone who was naturally strong and someone who'd been conditioned through sustained combat operations. Scarlett's performance suggested the latter, not just physical fitness, the kind of conditioning that came from carrying heavy equipment over long distances under hostile conditions. The sit-ups followed the same pattern, 142 repetitions with mechanical precision. Core strength clearly developed through training that went far beyond standard military requirements. Pull-ups were where most support personnel struggled. The upper body strength requirements typically favoring combat specialists who spent their careers carrying heavy weapons and equipment. Scarlett approached the bar with apparent uncertainty, reaching up like someone who'd never attempted the exercise. But the moment her hands closed around the metal, her body moved with practiced efficiency. 33 perfect repetitions, each one executed with controlled power that spoke of extensive training in environments where upper body strength was a survival requirement. By now, several instructors were paying attention. Brennan made notes on his clipboard while exchanging glances with other senior NCOs who'd noticed the discrepancy between Scarlett's supposed background and her actual performance. The 3-mile run was conducted on the compound's perimeter road, a challenging course that included several hills and uneven terrain designed to test endurance under realistic conditions. Scarlett started conservatively, positioned herself in the middle of the pack while the competitive types surged ahead in an early display of dominance. But as the run progressed, something became apparent to those watching closely. While other runners showed normal signs of exertion, heavy breathing, visible sweat gradually deteriorating, Scarlett maintained the same steady pace and controlled breathing from start to finish. She completed the course in 18 minutes and 35 seconds, fast enough to rank in the top 15%, but not so fast as to draw unwanted attention. It was a time that suggested someone who understood the difference between demonstrating competency and revealing capability. More importantly, she showed no signs of fatigue at the finish line. While other elite soldiers bent over their knees to catch their breath, Scarlett stood calmly, breathing barely elevated, looking like someone who could immediately begin another 3-mile run without difficulty. Lieutenant Paige Hartley, who'd finished in 14th place despite her intensive training regimen, found herself studying Scarlett with growing suspicion. The logistics clerk's performance was too consistent, too controlled, too indicative of someone whose physical conditioning had been developed for purposes that went far beyond administrative support. "Nice run," Hartley commented as they walked toward the equipment area for the next phase of testing. "Thank you, ma'am. You too. You don't seem winded." "I try to stay in shape." It was another perfectly reasonable response that revealed nothing while somehow suggesting everything. Hartley had spent enough time around special operations personnel to recognize the careful way they discussed their capabilities. Always understated, never revealing the true extent of their training or experience. 8 months earlier, different compound, different mission, same woman with different purpose. The facility sat in the North Carolina Pine Barrens, accessible only by unmarked roads that didn't appear on any civilian maps. No signs, no indicators, just chain-link fence and men with weapons who didn't ask questions because they already knew every answer that mattered. Scarlett Donovan stood in a concrete room that smelled like gun oil and old sweat. The kind of space where important things happened to people who would never talk about them. Across from her, Colonel Garrett Thorne looked like he'd been carved from old oak and bad memories. 66 years old. Silver hair cut high and tight, face mapped with scars that told stories spanning 4 decades of classified operations. Pale blue eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine, and a few things that would break them if they tried. He'd been a Navy SEAL when being a SEAL meant something different than it did now. Before the books, before the movies, before every other person with a trident tattoo had a podcast about discipline and cold showers. Thorne had been a ghost when ghosts were still invisible. Stage 4 cancer, 6 months if he was lucky, 4 if he wasn't. The kind of death sentence that made a man think about legacy, about unfinished business, about names that needed clearing before the dirt went over the coffin. "They'll underestimate you," Thorne said. His voice carried the rasp of someone who'd breathed too much cordite and spent too many years in places where the air itself was hostile. "Let them. It's your greatest weapon." Scarlett stood at attention. Not because protocol required it, because Thorne was the kind of man who commanded respect through existence alone. Desert Storm, February 1991, Operation Phantom Dagger. Thorne's voice carried weight that had nothing to do with volume. Elite SEALs went in. None came out. Intel said the target was empty. Intel was wrong. He moved to a wall covered in photographs. Young men in desert camouflage. Faces that would never age beyond what the camera captured. Someone in the command chain gave bad intelligence. Major Garrison was responsible for coordinating the broader operation. He trusted intel that came from someone dirty, someone who wanted that mission to fail. Scarlett's jaw tightened. She'd read the files, the heavily redacted reports that painted Thorne as everything from incompetent to traitorous. Character assassination so thorough it had ended not just his career, but his reputation. I've spent 34 years knowing the truth and being unable to prove it. Thorne turned to face her. Someone in that operation chain was dirty. Someone who's still operating, still compromising missions, still killing American soldiers. And you want me to find them. I want you to finish what I started. Thorne's voice carried finality. I've got maybe 4 months, maybe less. Before I die, I want my name cleared. I want the truth on record. I want those 8 men's families to know their husbands and fathers didn't die because their commander was incompetent. He moved closer, close enough that Scarlett could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of decades carrying blame for crimes he didn't commit. You'll go undercover, deep cover, logistics specialist, weak, forgettable, everything I trained you not to be. His hand reached out, touched her shoulder with the kind of weight that came from passing something heavy to someone else. They'll mock you, humiliate you, break you down, and you'll let them, because that's how you get invisible. How long? As long as it takes, 3 months, 6 months, however long until you identify the leak and document everything needed for prosecution. Scarlett nodded. This was the mission. This was why Thorne had spent 2 years training her in techniques that officially didn't exist. Why he'd passed along tradecraft from an era when spycraft meant human intelligence instead of satellite feeds. The target is at NATO Elite Training Compound, Virginia. Someone there has been compromising operations for over 3 decades. Someone with access to planning. Someone who knows how to stay invisible. Thorne's voice carried certainty. Find them. Prove it. Finish this. I will. And Red, the nickname he'd given her, felt like a benediction. When the time comes to reveal yourself, make it count. Make them understand they never saw you coming. That had been 8 months ago. 2 months later, Thorne's health had declined faster than anyone expected. The 4 months became 3, then 2. Now he lay in a private hospice facility, barely conscious, most days waiting for news that his name would be cleared before his body gave out completely. The weight of that mission pressed down on Scarlett every moment of every day. She carried it like armor, like penance, like purpose. The weapons familiarization took place in the compound's main armory. Master Sergeant Brennan had arranged a comprehensive display of NATO standard equipment. Each trainee would be required to demonstrate basic competency with rifles, pistols, and support weapons before being cleared for live fire exercises. Scarlett approached the weapons display with appropriate hesitation, reaching for an M4 carbine like someone who'd read about the system but never actually used one. Her initial grip was awkward, her stance uncertain, her overall handling suggesting someone clearly out of their depth. Brennan stepped closer, ready to provide basic instruction to someone who obviously needed it. First time with an M4 specialist? Yes, Sergeant. Scarlett's voice carried just the right note of nervous uncertainty. I mean, I've seen them, but never actually... No problem. Let's start with basic safety. Brennan's voice took on the patient tone of someone who'd taught this lesson 10,000 times. Always treat every weapon as if it's loaded. Never point the muzzle at anything you don't intend to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Be sure of your target and what's beyond it. Scarlett nodded attentively, playing the role of eager student receiving crucial instruction. But as Brennan guided her through the basic functions, charging handle, magazine release, safety selector, something began to shift in her handling. The uncertainty gradually gave way to competence. Competence gave way to what could only be described as familiarity. Her grip adjusted to optimal position without conscious thought. Her stance shifted into perfect shooting form. She performed a functions check with the kind of smooth efficiency that suggested extensive experience. The transformation was subtle enough that casual observation might miss it entirely. But Brennan had been training soldiers long enough to recognize the difference between someone learning new skills and someone remembering old ones. Where did you say you did your basic training? Brennan's tone stayed carefully neutral. Fort Benning, Sergeant. Uh-huh. And what was your MOS training? 92 Yankee, supply specialist. The answers were textbook correct, matching exactly what appeared in her personnel file. But Brennan had trained enough supply specialists to know that their weapons familiarity typically extended to basic rifle marksmanship and not much more. What he was seeing suggested someone whose weapons training had been considerably more comprehensive. He handed her a Beretta M9 pistol, watching as she accepted it with the same initial uncertainty she'd shown with the rifle. But again, as she handled the weapon, muscle memory began to override conscious performance. Her grip found optimal position automatically. Finger placement on the slide and trigger guard spoke of extensive training. She field stripped the weapon for cleaning with movements that were too practiced to be recently learned. Interesting technique, Brennan commented as Scarlett reassembled the pistol with professional efficiency. Where did you pick that up? Just following the manual, Sergeant. But Brennan had watched thousands of soldiers follow manuals. Manual trained competency looked nothing like what he was observing. This was the kind of familiarity that came from extensive use under stress, the kind of muscle memory that developed only through sustained training in environments where weapon maintenance was a survival requirement. By the time the weapons familiarization was complete, Brennan had filled 3 pages of notes with observations that painted a picture increasingly inconsistent with Scarlett's official background. He'd trained enough special operations personnel to recognize the signs, the specific way she checked chamber status, the particular grip modifications she unconsciously applied, the systematic approach to equipment inspection that spoke of training in advanced combat systems. Somewhere in the compound's elevated observation deck, Colonel Reed Garrison watched the entire exercise through high-powered optics. At 65, Garrison carried the weathered authority of someone who'd spent 40-plus years making decisions that determined whether people lived or died. Gray hair, deep lines around his eyes, posture that suggested someone still capable of violence despite the years. He'd commanded operations in Desert Storm as a young major. Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq. The kind of career that spanned generations of American military involvement in places most citizens couldn't find on a map. And he carried a secret that had eaten at him for 34 years. His morning phone calls had yielded interesting information. Not answers exactly, but confirmation that the right questions were being asked by people with appropriate security clearances. Scarlett Donovan was definitely not what she appeared to be. The challenge now was determining whether she represented a security threat or a security asset, whether her presence in his program was coincidental or part of a larger operation he wasn't cleared to know about. Because in 40 years of military service, Garrison had learned one fundamental truth. When someone showed up with a file that classified they were either hunting or being hunted, and he needed to know which. The barracks assignment put Scarlett in Building C, 3rd floor, room 14. The moment she entered the space, her behavior shifted in ways that would have been revealing to anyone with eyes trained to see them. While other trainees focused on claiming the best bunks or complaining about the Spartan accommodations, Scarlett was conducting what could only be described as a security assessment. She checked the window locks, tested the structural integrity of the doorframe, positioned her gear in a way that provided clear sight lines to both the entrance and the emergency exit. Her movements were subtle enough that casual observation might miss them, but anyone with tactical training would recognize the pattern of someone establishing a defensive position. Her roommate was Private Ainsley Merrick, Australian Defence Force, communications specialist who'd earned her place through superior technical skills and an infectious enthusiasm for military life. Merrick bounced into the room like someone attending the world's most exciting sleepover, chattering about the training schedule while Scarlett methodically arranged her minimal belongings. "So what's your specialty?" Merrick asked, settling onto her chosen bunk with casual familiarity. "I heard your logistics, but that's pretty broad." "Supply chain coordination, general logistics support." Scarlett's tone suggested the conversation was closed. But Merrick was the kind of person who viewed closed conversations as personal challenges. "Come on, there's got to be more to it than that. Nobody gets into NATO elite training for general anything." "What's your background? Where were you stationed before this?" Scarlett's pause lasted just long enough to be noticeable. "Fort Benning, administrative support mostly." The lie came smoothly, but Merrick had grown up in a military family and knew the difference between someone who'd spent time pushing paperwork and someone who had spent time in the field. Scarlett's hands were too calloused, her awareness too sharp, her gear arrangement too tactical for someone whose primary experience was administrative. Something didn't add up, and Merrick made a mental note to figure out what. The live fire exercise was scheduled for 1,400 hours, giving the trainees time to clean their weapons and prepare for what would be their first real test of combat readiness. Scarlett spent the interval methodically cleaning her assigned M4, movements efficient and practiced despite her supposed unfamiliarity with the system. The range was a sophisticated facility designed to test marksmanship under realistic conditions. Electronic targets at various distances, computer-controlled scoring systems, environmental factors designed to simulate combat stress. It was the kind of range that separated recreational shooters from combat marksmen. Scarlett approached her assigned firing position with the same apparent uncertainty she'd shown throughout the weapon's familiarization. Stance awkward, grip uncertain. Overall demeanor suggesting someone clearly out of her depth. The exercise began with basic marksmanship at 50 meters. Each trainee required to place 5 rounds within the target's scoring rings. Most of the elite soldiers performed well, their shots grouping tightly in the high-scoring zones with the consistency expected from special operations personnel. Scarlett's first shot went wide, missing the target entirely and striking the earthen backstop with a dull thud. Laughter rippled through the nearby firing positions as Blackwood's voice carried across the range. Looks like logistics needs some basic lessons. Maybe try holding it by the right end. Her second shot was closer but still outside the scoring rings, drawing more mockery from the elite trainees who were clustering their rounds in the target's center mass. Scarlett appeared to be struggling with basic concepts like sight alignment and trigger control. But Brennan, observing from the range tower, noticed something others missed. Scarlett's wild shots weren't actually wild. They were consistently striking specific points on the target framework, suggesting someone who was hitting exactly where she was aiming, just not where others expected her to aim. Her third shot struck the target's outer ring, a marginal improvement that suggested gradual learning. Her fourth shot moved closer to center. Her fifth shot struck the scoring zone with respectable accuracy. It was exactly the kind of progression someone might expect from a support specialist receiving her first serious marksmanship training. Slow initial learning, followed by rapid improvement as basic concepts clicked into place. But Brennan had been observing closely enough to notice the subtle adjustments Scarlett made between shots, not the fumbling corrections of someone learning new skills. The methodical fine-tuning of someone calibrating equipment to environmental conditions. The exercise progressed to longer ranges, 100 meters, then 200, with increasingly challenging conditions designed to test advanced marksmanship skills. Most support personnel struggled at these distances, their shots scattering as wind and range estimation challenges exceeded their training. Scarlett continued her pattern of apparent gradual improvement, shots slowly tightening into respectable groups while never quite achieving the precision demonstrated by elite combat specialists. It was a performance that suggested competence without excellence, progress without mastery. By the end of the exercise, her score placed her in the upper third of all participants. Respectable for support personnel, but not outstanding enough to draw unwanted attention. It was exactly the kind of performance that would satisfy requirements without raising questions about her actual capabilities. Brennan completed his scoring notes with growing certainty that Scarlett Donovan was considerably more than she appeared to be. Evening settled over the compound like a blanket. 200 elite warriors moved through their routines, some cleaning weapons, others studying training schedules. A few huddled in small groups, sharing stories and establishing the social connections that would carry them through demanding weeks ahead. Scarlett lay on her bunk in the darkness, listening to the sounds around her with attention that came from years of environments where situational awareness was survival. Merrick had fallen asleep within minutes of lights out, breathing settling into the deep rhythm of someone who'd never had reason to sleep lightly. But Scarlett remained awake, mind processing the day's information. She'd identified the key personalities, assessed the social dynamics, noted the security protocols and facility layout. More importantly, she'd established her cover identity successfully, the harmless logistics clerk who'd somehow stumbled into elite training. Tomorrow would bring the first real test. But for now, there was only the darkness and the weight of a mission that had already cost one man his reputation and would likely cost others their freedom before it was done. She thought about the photograph hidden in her gear bag, the image that would answer many questions if anyone found it, but also raise questions that could destroy everything she'd worked to accomplish. The picture showed a younger version of herself standing next to Colonel Garrett Thorne, both wearing gear that didn't appear in any official inventory, both looking like exactly what they were. Ghosts. As sleep finally claimed her, Scarlett's last conscious thought was of Thorne lying in that hospice bed, waiting for news that would clear his name before his body gave out. She would not fail him. She could not. Because some debts could only be paid with truth, and some truths could only be revealed through perfect deception. Tomorrow the real work would begin. Day 3 arrived with the kind of morning that promised violence. The sky hung gray and heavy over the NATO compound, moisture in the air thick enough to taste. The kind of weather that made men check their equipment twice and trust their instincts more than their orders. The compound's operators moved through pre-dawn routines with mechanical efficiency, weapons cleaned, gear staged, bodies fueled, and minds focused on the high-risk simulation exercise that would separate the competent from the exceptional. Scarlett stood in the logistics hub, a windowless room buried in the compound's administrative center. Banks of communication equipment hummed with electronic life, radio frequencies cycling through encrypted channels, computer monitors displaying facility schematics and exercise parameters. She'd been assigned coordination duty, communication relay between field elements and command, the kind of rear echelon position that matched her supposed specialty while keeping her away from the complex tactical evolutions. Exactly where she wanted to be. Because the best place to see everything was often the place everyone assumed saw nothing. The exercise briefing had been clear. Simulated terrorist attack, multiple hostile elements, coordinated assault on facility infrastructure. 200 trainees would respond according to their specialty assignments: testing crisis management, tactical response, decision-making under extreme pressure. What the briefing hadn't mentioned was the question that had kept Scarlett awake for the past 72 hours. How much of this simulation would stay simulated? Her surveillance devices planted 3 nights ago had picked up fragments, encrypted communications that shouldn't exist, movement patterns that suggested more than training preparation, financial transfers that connected to accounts she'd been tracking for months. Someone was using this exercise as cover for something real. The question was what and who, and whether she could stop it without blowing 4 months of deep cover work. 0800 hours. The simulation clock started. Across the compound, actors playing hostile forces began their choreographed assault. Electronic systems simulated explosions. Smoke generators created artificial chaos. Everything carefully controlled. Everything perfectly safe. For exactly 47 minutes. Then the eastern perimeter turned into hell. The explosion was real. Scarlett knew it the moment the shockwave hit, felt it in her bones, in the way the building structure shuddered, in the quality of the blast signature that no simulation could replicate. C4, maybe 15 pounds. Shaped charge designed to maximize structural damage and fragment projection. The kind of explosion meant to kill people. Her hands moved before conscious thought engaged, switching radio frequencies to emergency channels, pulling up facility schematics, identifying blast radius and likely casualties. The communication hub erupted into controlled chaos. Other personnel scrambling to understand what just happened, whether this was part of the exercise or something catastrophically wrong. Scarlett's mind cut through the confusion with surgical precision. Training that had nothing to do with logistics support and everything to do with operations in places where explosions were daily business. Secondary detonations followed. Fuel storage tanks in the eastern sector. The blast coming too fast, too coordinated. This wasn't accident or malfunction. This was attack. And somewhere in this facility, Colonel Reed Garrison was in the kill zone. Scarlett grabbed the emergency radio, adjusted frequency to a channel that shouldn't exist in her equipment, a channel that only certain people knew to monitor. Falcon Base, this is Reaper 7. Declare emergency protocols. Real-world attack in progress. Eastern sectors compromised. Requesting immediate tactical authority. The response came instantly. No questions, no hesitation. Reaper 7 confirmed. Emergency protocols active. You have tactical authority. execute at discretion. She was already moving, out of the logistics hub, through corridors filling with smoke, past personnel still trying to understand whether to treat this as an exercise or emergency. Her voice carried across the compound with an authority that made trained soldiers stop and listen. Omega-7 Protocol. This is not a drill. Eastern sectors evacuate immediately. All personnel clear to rally point, Delta. The words were specific, professional, revealing knowledge that should have been impossible for someone with her supposed clearance level. Omega-7 was a classified evacuation procedure, known only to personnel with access to the facility's highest security protocols. The kind of information that didn't appear in any manual a logistics specialist would ever see. But more shocking was the way elite soldiers responded to her commands. Special operations personnel who'd spent days mocking her suddenly found themselves following her directions without question. Their training recognized something their conscious minds hadn't yet processed. The voice of someone who understood crisis management at levels that transcended rank. Master Sergeant Wyatt Brennan emerged from a damaged building, blood running down his face from flying glass. Face mapped with shock and calculation as he tried to process what was happening. He spotted Scarlett directing evacuation procedures with tactical hand signals he'd never seen before. Signals too complex, too sophisticated for standard military communication. Signals that suggested training and specialized operational protocols that didn't exist in any unclassified manual. "Where did you learn those signals?" Brennan demanded, moving toward her with the kind of focus that came from knowing something fundamental had just shifted. Scarlett glanced at him, her green eyes now carrying an intensity that made him instinctively step back. The harmless logistics clerk was gone. Something else looked out from behind those eyes. Something that had seen violence and learned to speak its language fluently. "I wrote them, Sergeant." The simple statement hit Brennan like physical impact. Signal development was conducted by military intelligence specialists with decades of experience. Security clearances that went far beyond anything a logistics clerk should possess. But before he could pursue the question, another series of explosions erupted from the southern section. The crisis was escalating beyond anyone's capacity for rational response. Scarlett grabbed the radio from Brennan's equipment vest, adjusted the frequency with automatic precision. Her transmission was crisp, professional, revealing access to communication networks that were supposed to be restricted to senior command personnel. "Falcon Base, this is Reaper 7. Multiple detonations confirmed. Estimate 15 to 20 casualties. Medical support required immediately. Possible secondary attack in progress. Request immediate lockdown and sniper coverage on elevated positions." The response confirmed what Brennan was beginning to suspect. Reaper 7 confirmed. Medical en route. Lockdown initiated. Sniper teams deploying. Brennan stared at the radio, then at Scarlett, his 40 years of experience trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he thought he knew. "Who are you?" Scarlett's expression returned to careful neutrality. Someone who's tired of pretending to be harmless. She moved toward the damaged eastern sector. Not away from danger, but directly into it. Moving with purpose that came from knowing exactly where she needed to be. Because somewhere in that destruction, Colonel Garrison was either dead or dying. And if Garrison died, 34 years of secrets died with him. The building had partially collapsed, concrete and steel twisted into configurations that defied structural logic. Smoke thick enough to cut. Heat from burning fuel turning the air into something that fought every breath. Scarlett moved through the chaos with systematic efficiency, checking casualties, directing evacuation, managing tactical responses with comprehensive expertise that suggested this wasn't her first building collapse, wasn't her first rescue operation under fire. She found Garrison in what used to be a second-floor office, now ground level after the structural collapse, pinned under a support beam, conscious but bleeding, face pale with shock and blood loss, his eyes focused on her, recognition cutting through pain and confusion. "You," the word came out with effort. "Thorne sent you." "Stay still, Colonel. Help is coming. He sent you to finish me." Garrison's hand moved, found his sidearm, drew it with shaking fingers, pointed it at Scarlett with the kind of desperate determination that came from knowing death was close and wanting to control something before the end. He knew. He knew what I did, and now you're here to make sure justice gets served." Scarlett held very still, her hands visible, non-threatening, but her eyes calculating, measuring distance and angles, identifying the 17 different ways she could disarm him without causing further injury. But she didn't move, because sometimes the most dangerous weapon was patience. "Colonel Garrison," her voice carried calm that contradicted the weapon pointed at her chest. "Colonel Thorne didn't send me to kill you. He sent me to find the truth." "The truth?" Garrison's laugh turned into a cough, blood on his lips. "The truth is, I killed 8 of the best men I ever commanded, sent them into an ambush because I trusted intelligence I should have questioned. You didn't betray them, sir. Someone else did. Someone who's still operating, still compromising missions, still killing American soldiers." The gun wavered, Garrison's eyes searching hers for deception, for the lie that would confirm his worst fears. "Thorne took the blame for you," Scarlett continued, her voice gentle now. "He let them destroy his reputation to protect your family, to give your son a chance at a military career without the stain of his father's mistakes." "How do you know about my son?" "Because I've spent 4 months investigating everyone connected to Desert Storm. Everyone who had access to that intelligence. Everyone who could have compromised that operation." Scarlett moved closer, slowly, carefully. "You made a mistake, Colonel. But you're not a traitor, and neither was Thorne." The gun lowered, Garrison's hands shaking with more than just injury. "Then who?" "That's what I'm here to find out, but I need you alive to do it. So put the weapon down and let me get you out of here before this building finishes collapsing." For a long moment, Garrison stared at her. 40 years of command decisions crystallizing into this single choice. Trust or paranoia, faith or fear. He lowered the weapon. "Help me." Scarlett keyed her radio. "Falcon Base Reaper 7. I have Colonel Garrison, Northeast Section Grid Reference 47 Alpha. He's injured but stable. Requires immediate medical extraction." "Copy Reaper 7. Medical team en route. ETA 3 minutes." She worked to stabilize Garrison while they waited. Field medicine applied with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from doing this in places where help was hours away instead of minutes. "Reaper 7, Garrison said quietly. "That's not a logistics designation." "No, sir, it's not." "How long have you been here?" 4 months, since January. "And I never suspected." He tried to smile. Failed. "Thorne trained you well. He trained me to be invisible until the moment invisibility stopped serving the mission." The medical team arrived, professional, efficient, extracting Garrison with the kind of care that suggested they knew exactly who he was and how important his survival was. As they loaded him onto a stretcher, Garrison grabbed Scarlett's arm. "Find them. Whoever killed my men, whoever destroyed Thorne's name." His grip tightened. "Finish this." "I will, sir." The helicopter evacuation created a whirlwind of dust and debris. Scarlett watched it lift off, carrying Garrison to a hospital where questions would wait until he was stable enough to answer them. Behind her, a voice carried professional authority and something approaching awe. "Major Donovan." She turned. A man stood there, mid-50s. Weathered face that belonged to someone who'd spent decades in places where comfort was luxury and survival was achievement. Eyes that had seen everything and believed half of it. SEAL Commander Dalton Reeves. Legend in special operations circles. The kind of man whose influence shaped policy at the highest levels of military command. "Commander." Scarlett's posture shifted. Not quite attention, but close. Respect without submission. "Status report. Cover partially compromised. Brennan suspects operator-level training. Garrison knows my designation, but the network doesn't know I'm here. Not yet. Timeline, 36 hours, maybe less. Someone used this exercise as cover for assassination attempt. Garrison was the target, which means whoever tried to kill him knows he's a threat." Reeves nodded, processing information with the kind of speed that came from making life-or-death decisions on incomplete intelligence. "Colonel Thorne, declining. Maybe 2 weeks left. He needs to know before the end." "Then finish it." Reeves's voice carried finality. "Whatever it takes, whoever you need to burn, get me the truth before that old man dies believing he failed his team." "Understood, sir." Reeves turned to leave. Paused. Read. The tattoo reveal. When it happens, make it count. Make them understand they never saw you coming. That's the plan, Commander. The compound settled into organized chaos. Emergency response teams managing casualties. Security personnel establishing perimeter. Investigation teams trying to determine what the hell just happened and how it happened on their watch. Captain Jackson Blackwood stood near the eastern perimeter, watching Scarlett coordinate with command personnel. His crew gathered around him like wolves trying to understand why the prey was suddenly giving orders. That's not logistics, Trent Colburn said quietly. That's command-level crisis management. She moved like special operations, Wade Grayson added, during the evac. I watched her clear 3 rooms. Perfect technique. Professional. Ryan Voss, the youngest of the group, had gone quiet, his earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching fear. Who is she? Blackwood didn't answer, because he didn't have an answer, just questions that were multiplying faster than his ability to process them. He'd spent 4 months mocking her, humiliating her, building his reputation on her apparent weakness. And now he was watching her coordinate rescue operations with the kind of authority that made full colonels defer to her judgment. Something fundamental had just shifted, and Blackwood had the uncomfortable feeling that he'd been playing a game where he never understood the rules. That evening, after the compound had been secured and casualties evacuated, and the investigation teams had finished their initial assessment, Scarlett found herself in a secure briefing room with Commander Reeves and 3 other people whose names she didn't know and whose faces suggested they operated in circles where names were luxury. The briefing was clinical, professional, the kind of conversation that happened in rooms that officially didn't exist. 4 casualties, 13 injured, structural damage estimated at $7 million, and 1 assassination attempt that failed because someone who wasn't supposed to be there had been exactly where she needed to be. The explosive analysis confirmed C4, military grade, professionally placed. The kind of work that required training and access to materials that weren't available at civilian outlets, meaning whoever planted those charges had military background, had access to secure storage, had detailed facility knowledge, meaning the leak was everything Thorne had believed it was, a long-term penetration at the highest levels. Someone who'd been operating for decades, someone who was still active. Suspects, Reeves asked. Scarlett pulled up files on the secure tablet. 3 primary, Master Sergeant Wyatt Brennan, 40 years service, access to all personnel files, perfect position for intelligence gathering. Lieutenant Paige Hartley, unexplained wealth, new vehicle, recent overseas travel to countries with known intelligence connections. Captain Jackson Blackwood, offshore banking activity flagged by FinCEN, suspicious communication patterns with foreign nationals. Reeves studied the files. You're ruling out Garrison. He's either clean or the best actor I've ever met. His guilt over Desert Storm is genuine, and someone just tried to kill him. People don't usually try to kill their co-conspirators. Unless he was trying to retire, cut ties, become a liability. Scarlett considered, nodded. Possible. I'm not ruling anyone out until I have proof. Timeline. Tomorrow night, advanced live fire exercise. I'm assigned to observation tower. Isolated position. If someone wants to eliminate me, that's when they'll try. You're using yourself as bait. It's worked before. Reeves smiled, grim, humorless. Colonel Thorne taught you well. He taught me that the best way to catch a ghost is to make them think they're hunting you, right up until the moment they realize they're the ones being hunted. The briefing concluded with operational parameters and extraction protocols, the kind of details that meant people were planning for things to go very wrong very quickly. As the others filed out, Reeves held Scarlett back. How are you holding up? The question caught her off guard. In 4 months of deep cover, nobody had asked her that. Nobody had treated her as anything other than the role she was playing. I'm fine, sir. You're lying. But I respect the professionalism. Reeves moved to the window, looked out over the compound where 200 elite warriors were settling into evening routines. Thorne was my mentor too, 20 years ago. He taught me that the hardest part of being invisible isn't the deception. It's remembering who you actually are when everyone's decided you're someone else. I remember, sir. Good, because tomorrow you're going to stop being invisible. And when that happens, you need to be ready for everything that comes after. Midnight found Scarlett moving through the compound's administrative section. Black tactical gear that swallowed light, face covered, movement patterns that belonged to someone who'd done this in places where discovery meant death. She'd spent the past 3 nights planting surveillance devices. Now it was time to gather intelligence that would either confirm or eliminate suspects. Master Sergeant Brennan's office first. Lock picked in 7 seconds. Door opened without sound. Inside smelled like gun oil and old coffee and the accumulated weight of 40 years in uniform. His desk was organized with military precision, files arranged by classification level, computer password protected but accessible to someone with the right training. Scarlett copied hard drives while searching physical files. Financial records showed irregular but significant deposits, offshore accounts, the kind of financial activity that suggested someone was being paid for something they couldn't report on a tax return. But the pattern was wrong. The deposits didn't correlate with compromise operations, didn't match the timeline of intelligence leaks. Brennan was dirty, but maybe not the right kind of dirty. Lieutenant Paige Hartley's quarters next. Smaller space. Personal items that spoke of someone trying to maintain humanity in an environment that didn't value it. The expensive items were explained by inheritance documentation. Trust fund that became accessible at age 25. The overseas travel was legitimate. Family connections in countries that happened to have intelligence services, but also had tourist attractions. Hartley was clean, or so deep that even forensic analysis couldn't find the dirt. Captain Jackson Blackwood's quarters were in officer housing. Better accommodations, more space, the kind of privilege that came with rank. Scarlett moved through his room with systematic efficiency, found the hidden laptop in the third place she checked. Professionals always hid important things in the third place. First 2 were decoys. Third was real. The laptop was encrypted. Military-grade security that would take normal methods hours to bypass. But Scarlett had methods that weren't normal. 7 minutes later, she was inside. Financial records, communication logs, operational files that shouldn't exist on personal equipment. But as she read, her understanding shifted. Blackwood wasn't the leak. Blackwood was investigating the leak. The offshore accounts were trace operations, following money that connected to compromise operations. The foreign communications were with private intelligence contractors hired by families of dead soldiers. Families who wanted answers about why their sons and husbands and fathers had died in operations that should have been routine. Blackwood's uncle had died in Desert Storm. Operation Phantom Dagger. One of the 8 SEALs who never came home. He'd spent 3 years investigating, tracing financial patterns, building a case that would eventually point to whoever sold out his uncle's team. Scarlett closed the laptop, returned it to its hiding place, left everything exactly as she'd found it. Blackwood was an ally, just one who didn't know she existed. That left Brennan on, and whoever else was operating in the shadows deep enough that 4 months of investigation hadn't revealed them. Her radio crackled. Encrypted frequency that only 3 people could access. Reaper 7 Falcon base. Go ahead. Financial analysis complete. Large fund transfers flagged. Account traced to facility personnel. Sending you the name now. Scarlett's tablet lit up. Secure file transfer. She opened it and felt everything crystallize into terrible clarity. The name on the account, the person who'd been receiving payments for 34 years. The ghost who'd sold out Operation Phantom Dagger and dozens of operations since. It wasn't who she expected. Wasn't who anyone expected. Which meant tomorrow's trap was going to be more complicated than planned. Day 4 arrived with anticipation that tasted like metal and adrenaline. The advanced live fire exercise had been scheduled for weeks. Complex evolution designed to test rapid target engagement under realistic stress conditions. Scarlett was assigned to the observation tower. Elevated position overlooking the entire range. Perfect spot for coordinating the communication and monitoring trainee performance. Also perfect spot for an isolated kill. High enough that nobody would hear. Far enough from main activity that delayed response was guaranteed. She knew it was a trap. The question was whether the people setting it knew she knew. Whether they were counting on her arrogance or her desperation. She armed herself with weapons that didn't appear on any equipment roster. Personal sidearm, tactical knife, communication equipment that operated on frequencies that officially didn't exist. And she climbed the tower stairs with the certain knowledge that someone was going to try to kill her today. The only question was whether she'd be fast enough to stop them. Lieutenant Cameron Webb met her at the tower entrance. 29 years old, recent transfer, background that checked out but felt wrong in ways Scarlett couldn't articulate. Specialist Donovan. Webb's smile didn't reach his eyes. Ready for tower duty? Yes, sir. They climbed together. Webb making small talk that felt like reconnaissance, probing for weakness, testing responses. The tower observation deck offered 360-degree views of the range complex, electronic equipment for monitoring target systems, radio gear for communication with the ground personnel, and absolutely no cover if someone started shooting. Webb moved to the western window. Scarlett positioned herself near the eastern exit, maintaining distance, calculating angles. You've been causing problems, specialist. The words came casual, conversational, but carried weight that meant the conversation was over and something else was beginning. Sir, 4 months of observation, careful performance management, perfect cover maintenance. Webb turned, his hand moving toward his sidearm with professional speed. But you made one mistake. You saved Colonel Garrison. The weapon cleared leather, rose toward center mass. Webb's training evident in the smooth draw and stable platform, but Scarlett was already moving. 4 seconds. That's how long it took to close, distance, redirect the weapon, apply joint lock, and put Webb face down on the deck with his arm hyperextended and his sidearm clattering across the floor. What are you? Webb gasped, pain and shock making his voice tight. Someone you should have done more research on. The window exploded inward. High-powered rifle shot from elevated position. The round missed Scarlett by centimeters. Would have been center mass if she'd been standing where Webb expected. Multiple shooters. Coordinated assault. This wasn't amateur hour. Scarlett grabbed Webb, used him as human shield while she moved toward cover. Returned fire from her sidearm, forcing the snipers to adjust. How many? She demanded. Go to hell. Another shot. This one through the eastern window. Angles suggested 3 separate shooting positions. Professional setup. Military training evident in positioning and fire discipline. They weren't trying to kill her quickly. They were trying to pin her down, keep her contained until they could set up the perfect shot, which meant they were professionals, which meant this went deeper than one compromised lieutenant. Scarlett keyed her radio, emergency frequency that would bring a response from people who understood what Reaper designations meant. Falcon Base Reaper 7, under fire, multiple hostiles, hostile. Observatory Tower Grid reference 23 Delta, requesting immediate tactical response. Reaper 7 confirmed, response teams deploying, ETA 4 minutes. 4 minutes, lifetime in combat, eternity when people were trying to kill you. She had to move. Staying in the tower meant eventual successful shot. But moving meant exposing herself to 3 separate sniper positions. Sometimes the best way out was down. Scarlett grabbed Webb, hauled him to the stairwell, started descending with weapon up and awareness maxed. Every corner a potential ambush, every shadow a possible threat. Halfway down, she heard voices below. Men moving up, trap completing itself. She was boxed. Snipers above, ground team below. 4 minutes until help arrived, might as well be 4 hours. Webb started struggling, trying to break free, trying to call out to the men below. Scarlett put him to sleep with a blood choke. Professional, efficient. He'd wake up with a headache, but nothing permanent. Then she did something that training said was suicide, but instinct said was survival. She went up, back toward the sniper fire, back toward the kill zone. Because sometimes the most dangerous place was the safest, specifically because nobody expected you to go there. The tower roof access was locked. She picked it in 3 seconds, emerged onto the roof with weapon ready and prayer that professional discipline would keep the snipers focused on the observation deck windows. The roof offered different angles, different options, and most importantly, different expectations. She identified the sniper positions, 3 elevated platforms across the range complex, professional hides that would have been invisible to anyone not trained to see them. Scarlett's radio crackled. Reaper 7 Falcon Base. Response teams at your location in 90 seconds. requesting position confirmation. Falcon Base, I'm on tower roof. 3 hostile sniper positions marked with laser designation. Ground team in stairwell. 1 hostile detained observation deck unconscious. Requires medical attention. Copy Reaper 7. Designated positions confirmed. Response teams authorized to engage. The response came with helicopter gunships and tactical teams that moved like water over broken ground. Professional. Overwhelming. The kind of force that turned ambushes into massacres. The 3 sniper positions were neutralized in under 30 seconds. Ground team in the stairwell surrendered when they realized they were outgunned and surrounded. Scarlett descended to find Master Sergeant Brennan standing in the observation deck. Weapon drawn, pointed at the ground, eyes locked on her with expression that combined shock and calculation. 4 months, he said quietly. 4 months you have been here, playing weak, playing harmless. He shook his head. Who are you really? Someone who's tired of ghosts. Below, Captain Blackwood and his crew had arrived, drawn by the gunfire and the emergency response. They stood in the tower's shadow, watching Scarlett descend, watching her move with confidence that belonged to someone who just fought off an assassination attempt and looked annoyed rather than terrified. Major Donovan, Commander Reeves had arrived by helicopter, walking across the range with the kind of calm that suggested assassination attempts were just another Tuesday. Time to end the charade. Scarlett looked at the assembled personnel, 200 elite warriors watching, waiting, trying to understand what they were witnessing. Emergency assembly, Reeves announced, his voice carrying across the range with authority that made colonels snap to attention. All personnel, main courtyard, 15 minutes. As the crowd dispersed, Blackwood approached slowly, his earlier arrogance completely absent, replaced by something that looked like respect mixed with healthy fear. You're not logistics, he said. No. You're not even a specialist. No. Then what are you? Scarlett smiled, cold, humorless, the kind of smile that belonged to someone who'd just survived an assassination attempt and was now planning retribution. Tomorrow, Captain. Tomorrow you'll understand exactly what I am and why you should have been nicer to the weak girl you thought you could mock with impunity. She walked away, leaving Blackwood standing in the shadow of the tower where someone had just tried to kill her and failed. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow the ghost would become visible. Tomorrow they would understand the difference between someone who appeared harmless and someone who chose to appear harmless. And the difference was everything. The courtyard filled with bodies in tension. 200 elite warriors arranged themselves in loose formation. Navy SEALs, Delta Force, British SAS, German KSK. Men who'd seen combat in a dozen countries and thought they'd seen everything. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Scarlett stood off to the side, still wearing the wrinkled gray t-shirt and cargo pants that had become her uniform, still carrying herself like someone who didn't quite belong. But something had shifted in the way she held herself, something fundamental that made experienced operators instinctively give her space. Captain Jackson Blackwood positioned himself near the front, his crew flanking him like always. But the dynamic had changed. The mockery was gone, replaced by wariness that came from watching someone survive a coordinated assassination attempt with the kind of casual efficiency that suggested it wasn't her first. Lieutenant Paige Hartley stood with the other junior officers, gray eyes locked on Scarlett with expression that combined curiosity and growing understanding. Master Sergeant Wyatt Brennan was everywhere and nowhere, moving through the crowd with practiced ease, clipboard in hand, recording details, observing, always observing. Colonel Reed Garrison sat in a wheelchair near the command platform, bandaged and bruised but alive, his presence a testament to medical skill and sheer stubborn refusal to die before getting answers. Commander Dalton Reeves took the elevated platform. 54 years of special operations experience compressed into a frame that looked like it had been forged from old steel and hard decisions. His presence commanded silence without requiring words. For 4 months, Reeves began his voice carrying across the assembled formation. This facility has hosted someone operating under deep cover, someone whose presence here was classified at levels most of you will never be cleared for. The courtyard had gone absolutely quiet, Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. That individual was tasked with identifying a security leak that has compromised NATO operations for over 3 decades. A leak responsible for the deaths of dozens of American and Allied soldiers. A leak that had remained invisible despite multiple investigations. Reeves paused, let the words settle like stones in still water. 4 days ago, someone tried to eliminate that operative. Yesterday, someone tried again. Both attempts failed, because the person they were trying to kill had been trained by one of the finest warriors this country has ever produced. He turned, looked directly at Scarlett. Specialist Scarlett Donovan. Step forward. Scarlett moved through the crowd, soldiers parting like water, creating a path that felt ceremonial. Final. She reached the platform, stood before Reeves with posture that suggested she'd done this before in circumstances far more hostile. Specialist Donovan, Reeves said, his voice carrying weight that made the words feel like pronouncement rather than statement, is actually Major Scarlett Donovan, United States Army Special Operations, assigned to Joint Special Operations Command, embedded under deep cover for counterintelligence purposes. The reaction rippled through the crowd like shockwave through water. Whispers, disbelief, the fundamental understanding that everything they'd witnessed over 4 months had been performance. Theater. Deception so complete, it had fooled 200 of the world's most elite warriors. Major Donovan has completed 52 classified missions over the past 6 years. 0 failures, 0 compromises. She carries one of the highest security clearances in the United States military, and for 4 months you've treated her like she was nothing. Reeves's words landed with the weight of judgment. Men who'd mocked her shifted uncomfortably. Blackwood's face had gone pale. Even Brennan had stopped moving, standing frozen like he'd finally encountered something he couldn't evaluate or categorize. 4 personnel have been detained in connection with yesterday's assassination attempt, Reeves continued. All have confirmed they were acting on orders from someone within this facility. Someone with decades of experience. Someone with access to classified operational planning. Someone who has been operating as a ghost for over 30 years. Security personnel moved through the crowd, professional, efficient. They surrounded Lieutenant Cameron Webb where he sat in restraints near the medical station, moved him toward the platform like offering before altar. Webb looked broken, defeated, the kind of expression that belonged to someone who'd bet everything on a single play and watched it fail spectacularly. Lieutenant Webb, Reeves said coldly, you were hired as contractor, paid to eliminate a threat. Who hired you? Webb's jaw tightened, silence stretched, then cracked under the weight of inevitability. I never met them. Orders came through encrypted channels, payment through dead drops, professional setup, military-grade operational security. How many operations have you participated in? Dozens over 3 years, different targets, different missions, but always the same profile. People who were asking the wrong questions, getting too close to information someone wanted buried. Who else is part of the network? Webb rattled off names. 5 personnel, mid-level staff, support specialists, people invisible enough to operate without suspicion, each one representing a thread in network that had survived decades by staying small and staying patient. And your handler, Reeves pressed, the person who coordinated everything, who gave the orders and distributed the payments, who was the architect of this network? I told you, I never met them. But you communicated with them. Through encrypted channels only, voice modulation, security protocols that made identification impossible. Reeves turned to the assembled formation, his expression carrying grim satisfaction. Major Donovan spent 4 months infiltrating this network, documenting communication patterns, tracing financial flows, building a case that would stand up in military tribunal. He paused for effect. Yesterday, financial analysis identified the account receiving payments for over 3 decades. The account that connects every compromised operation dating back to Desert Storm. The tension ratcheted higher, 200 warriors holding collective breath. The account belongs to Master Sergeant Wyatt Brennan. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The name hung in the air like verdict waiting to be executed. Then chaos. Brennan moved with speed that belied his 58 years, not toward the exits, towards Scarlett, his hand finding his sidearm with practiced efficiency, drawing and raising in single fluid motion. But Scarlett was faster. She'd been watching him throughout the briefing, tracking his position, calculating angles, waiting for the moment when realization became action. Her weapon cleared leather before his finger found trigger. Her aim locked center mass before his muzzle rose past 45 degrees. Don't. The single word carried absolute certainty. You won't make it. Brennan froze, his weapon pointing at ground between them. His eyes locked on hers with expression that cycled through calculation, resignation, and something approaching respect. 4 months, he said quietly. 4 months under the same roof, training together, evaluating together, and I never saw you. That was the point, Sergeant, or should I say Colonel Brennan. The revelation hit like secondary explosion. Brennan wasn't just Master Sergeant. He was retired colonel, forced retirement in 1993, identity buried through program restructuring, perfect position, access to everything, suspected by no one. How did you figure it out? Brennan's voice carried genuine curiosity, professional interest from one operator to another. Your signal modifications. The techniques you taught were too advanced, too specific to Tier 1 operations that officially never happened. Only someone with your background would know them. Scarlett's weapon never wavered. Then financial forensics confirmed what tactical analysis suggested. You've been compromised for 22 years, since your forced retirement in 2003. 28 years of active service, Brennan said, his voice carrying bitterness that had been aging for decades. I gave everything, operated in places that don't exist, did things that would make most of these warriors vomit. And what did I get? Forced retirement at 43 for political reasons. Pension that barely covers rent. So you sold out? I survived. Foreign intelligence pays better than VA benefits. Much better. 8 SEALs died in Desert Storm because of you. Scarlett's voice went cold. Operation Phantom Dagger. You fed bad intelligence, sent them into ambush, then framed Colonel Garrett Thorne to cover your involvement. Thorne was careless, made himself vulnerable. Someone had to take the fall. Thorne was your friend. Thorne was collateral damage. Brennan's expression hardened. This isn't personal, Major. This is survival in a system that discards soldiers like used equipment. From the crowd, a voice carried across the courtyard. You're wrong, Sergeant. Colonel Garrison rolled his wheelchair forward, bandaged and broken, but radiating authority that transcended injury. I coordinated the operation that killed those men. I was the major who trusted intelligence without proper verification. The failure was mine. Garrison's voice carried weight that made the confession feel like atonement. Colonel Thorne knew. He figured it out within weeks, and he took the blame to protect my family, to give my son a chance at military career without his father's mistakes destroying his future. Garrison looked directly at Blackwood. Jackson, I'm your father, and I made a mistake that cost 8 good men their lives, but I've spent 34 years trying to atone. That's what honor looks like. Not perfection, but the courage to keep trying after you fail. Blackwood's face went white. You're Reed Garrison, your father, the officer who failed Phantom Dagger. The man Thorne protected. Garrison's voice broke. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, son. Blackwood stood frozen, processing the revelation that his father's guilt had shaped his entire life in ways he'd never understood. But you, Brennan, Garrison continued, his voice hardening. You turned personal grievance into betrayal. Used your position to compromise operations. Got soldiers killed for money. That's not survival. That's treason. Brennan's weapon started to rise. I'm not going to prison. No, Scarlett said. You're not. Her finger moved toward trigger. Professional, efficient. The kind of shot that ended threats before they became casualties. But Ryan Voss moved faster. The 21-year-old private who'd spent 4 months mocking Scarlett as entertainment threw himself at Brennan, tackled him from the side. Young and stupid and brave, in the way that only comes from not yet understanding mortality. The weapon discharged, round going wide. Scarlett shifted aim, tracking Brennan as he went down under Voss's weight. Then Blackwood was there. Then Trent Colburn. Then Wade Grayson. The crew that had spent 4 months building their reputation on humiliating her now formed protective circle around her position. "We might have mocked you, Major," Blackwood said quietly, weapon trained on Brennan, "but we're still American soldiers, and we don't let traitors kill our people." Security personnel swarmed forward. Professional extraction. Brennan was subdued, disarmed, and restrained in under 10 seconds. His network members were being rounded up simultaneously across the facility, coordinated operation that had been planned down to the second. As they took Brennan away, Scarlett moved to where Voss lay on the ground. The private had taken a round during the tackle. Nothing vital, but enough to warrant medical attention. "That was stupid," Scarlett said. "Yeah," Voss grinned through pain, "but it felt right. You probably saved lives, including mine. Does this mean you won't remember that thing with the water glass in the mess hall?" Scarlett smiled. "We'll see." The courtyard began to settle, but the tension remained. The weight of revelation that would take days or weeks to fully process. Commander Reeves returned to the platform. "Major Donovan, final confirmation of your authority requires visual verification of designation. Regulations require exposure of classified markings." Scarlett nodded. This was the moment. The reveal that would cement everything, make it official, turn performance into permanent record. She reached for the hem of her gray t-shirt, prepared to lift it, show the tattoo that marked her as something beyond normal classification. But Lieutenant Cameron Webb had one final act of defiance left in him. He broke free from his guards, weak restraints that assumed broken men stayed broken. Lunged at Scarlett with desperate energy that came from knowing this was the last chance for anything. "You ruined everything." Webb's voice carried rage and fear in equal measure. His hands found the fabric of her shirt, grabbed, pulled. The gray material was old, worn, weakened by repeated washing and 4 months of hard use. It tore completely, ripped from collar to hem in single violent motion, exposed her back and shoulder to 200 witnesses. For exactly 3 seconds, the world stopped. The tattoo was masterwork of black ink that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Dominating Scarlett's right shoulder blade was a human skull rendered in intricate detail. But this wasn't simple death's head common to military units. This skull wore a crown. Ornate piece of royal regalia with detailed gems and precious metals that spoke of hours under the needle by artists who understood the significance of every line. Below the crowned skull, in letters that looked like they'd been carved rather than tattooed, were the characters RQ-7. The silence stretched beyond comprehension. 200 elite operators processing what they were seeing. Understanding dawning like sunrise over battlefield. From somewhere in the crowd, a voice whispered with reverence that made the words sound like prayer. "Reaper Queen." The whisper spread like fire through dry grass. Reaper Queen, RQ-7, designation that existed in legend more than fact. Stories told in bars where special operations personnel gathered. Tales of operators who didn't officially exist, but whose influence shaped conflicts around the world. Only 9 people worldwide carried Reaper designation, each one representing the absolute pinnacle of special operations capability. Each one personally selected by command structure that operated above normal military hierarchy. They were ghosts hunting ghosts, instruments of policy that couldn't be implemented through official channels, warriors who fought battles that would never appear in history books. Master Sergeant Brennan, despite everything, despite the betrayal and the treason and the decades of murder, stopped struggling against his restraints, stared at Scarlett with expression that combined shock and something approaching awe. "RQ designation," he said quietly. "Ghost trained you, actually trained a Reaper. He trained me to finish what he started." Scarlett's voice carried across the silent courtyard. "To clear his name, to find the truth, to make sure that 8 dead SEALs and their families finally got justice." She turned to face the assembled formation. "For 4 months, you've treated me like I was nothing, mocked me, humiliated me, used me as entertainment, and I let you. Because how you treat people you think are beneath you reveals everything about your character." Her eyes found Blackwood. "Some of you apologized after yesterday, showed respect once you knew I was dangerous. But that's not real respect. Real respect means treating people with dignity regardless of their perceived power." Her gaze moved to Paige Hartley. Some of you tried to protect me when you thought I was weak, showed kindness when others showed cruelty. That's real character. That's real strength. She looked at Ryan Voss being treated by medics, and some of you proved that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing the right thing even when you're terrified. Commander Reeves stepped forward. Major Scarlett Donovan, RQ-7, your mission is complete. Colonel Garrett Thorne's name will be cleared. Operation Phantom Dagger will be reinvestigated. The 8 SEALs who died will be honored properly, and their families will finally know the truth. Scarlett nodded. Mission complete. But the weight didn't lift, because there was still one more thing that needed to happen. Her encrypted phone vibrated. Private message. 2 words that carried weight of entire world. He's dying. The hospice facility sat in the North Carolina mountains, quiet place where men who'd spent their lives in violence came to find peace before the end. Private rooms, professional staff, dignity in the final hours. Scarlett arrived by helicopter, still wearing torn shirt and cargo pants, still carrying the weight of 4 months that had felt like 4 years. Colonel Garrett Thorne lay in bed that looked too small for man who'd once filled rooms with presence. 66 years old, but looking 80. Cancer had taken everything except the essential core, the part that made him Thorne. His pale blue eyes opened when Scarlett entered, focused on her with effort that came from marshaling reserves that barely existed. Red, the nickname came out as Whisper, but it carried weight of mentor-recognizing student. Mission, complete, sir. Scarlett moved to his bedside, took his hand. Brennan is in custody. His network is dismantled. Your name is cleared. Operation Phantom Dagger is being reinvestigated. The families will know the truth, that their husbands and fathers died because of betrayal, not because their commander was incompetent. Thorne's eyes closed, relief washing over features that had carried blame for 34 years. Good, that's good. Garrison confessed his mistake publicly, acknowledged you took the blame to protect his family. Your honor is restored, sir. Not my honor. Thorne's breath came with difficulty, each word an effort. Their honor, 8 men, good men. They deserved better than lies. Scarlett felt tears building, fought them back, failed. You trained me well, sir. Everything you taught me, every lesson, it mattered. Not my legacy, kid. Thorne's hand squeezed hers with surprising strength. Yours, make it count. I will, sir. Promise me. His eyes opened again, locked on hers with intensity that transcended dying body. Promise you will keep fighting, keep hunting the ghosts, keep standing between evil and innocence. I promise. And Red, when they ask about the Reaper Queen, tell them. He struggled for breath, for words. Tell them she learned from the best. I'll tell them the truth, sir, that the greatest warrior I ever knew taught me that strength without honor is tyranny, that silence can be the loudest weapon, and that true warriors protect the truth even when it costs everything. Thorne smiled, faint but genuine. Good girl. The monitors began their inevitable decline, steady rhythm becoming irregular, then sporadic, then the flat tone that announced endings. Scarlett held his hand until it was over, until the greatest warrior she'd ever known took his final breath and became memory. Rest easy, Phantom, she whispered. Mission complete. 2 weeks later, the ceremony at the Wall of Heroes drew dignitaries and warriors from across the special operations community. The kind of gathering that happened when someone who mattered was finally given the recognition they had earned. Colonel Garrett Thorne's name was unveiled. Bronze plaque with his photo and service record. Sanitized version that didn't mention the classified operations or the years under shadow. But it named him hero, and that was truth enough. Scarlett stood in dress uniform. RQ-7 tattoo visible despite regulations. Special dispensation granted for Reaper designation. The skull and crown marking her as something beyond normal hierarchy. She gave the eulogy, short, professional, words that carried weight because they were true. Colonel Thorne taught me 3 things. That strength without honor is tyranny. That silence can be the loudest weapon. And that true warriors protect the truth even when it costs everything. She paused. Let the words settle. He spent 34 years protecting a truth that destroyed his reputation. He could have exposed the real traitor, could have saved himself, but that would have destroyed innocent family. So he carried the blame, accepted the shame, endured the dishonor. That's not weakness. That's the highest form of strength, and it's a standard we should all aspire to. The ceremony concluded with honors befitting a warrior, 21-gun salute, taps played by a single bugler, the weight of respect that came too late but mattered nonetheless. Afterward, Colonel Garrison approached, no longer in wheelchair, healing slowly, but healing. He'd be proud, Garrison said quietly. He trained me to be invisible, but he made me visible to myself. What's next for you, Major? Scarlett's encrypted phone vibrated. New orders, new mission, new identity to assume, and new ghosts to hunt. What would Phantom do, she said. Garrison smiled, sad, understanding. He'd say, trust your training, Red. Then I'm going to work, sir. 3 days later, CIA headquarters at Langley bustled with bureaucratic energy. Personnel moving through corridors with purpose that suggested importance, whether or not importance actually existed. Nobody paid attention to the woman in dark business suit, dark hair pulled back in professional style, glasses that suggested analyst rather than operator, security badge that identified her as contractor from private intelligence firm. She moved through the building with practiced efficiency, knowing where to go because she'd studied the layout until it was instinct. Her target sat in fourth floor office, high-ranking officer, impeccable service record, security clearance that granted access to operations across multiple theaters, and financial activity that suggested someone was being paid for information they shouldn't be sharing. Scarlett settled into desk across the corridor, laptop open, headphones on, looking like another contractor doing another assessment for another committee that would generate another report nobody would read. But her real attention was on the office across the hall, on the man whose career was about to end in ways he couldn't imagine. Because Brennan hadn't been the top. He'd been middle management, the person who coordinated operations and distributed payments, but answered to someone higher. Someone who'd been operating for over 40 years. Someone who'd survived multiple investigations. Someone who thought they were invisible. They were wrong. Her phone vibrated. Encrypted message from Commander Reeves. Reaper 7 authorization granted. Execute at your discretion. Scarlett smiled, cold, professional, the kind of expression that belonged to someone who hunted ghosts for a living. They think Brennan was the only ghost, she whispered to herself. They're wrong. She watched the office door, watched her target move inside his carefully constructed life, watched him operate with confidence that came from decades of successful deception. Some ghosts hunt other ghosts, she said softly. Her hand moved to the concealed weapon under her jacket. Not to draw, just to confirm it was there, ready for the moment when observation became action. And the best ghosts, we're patient. We wait, we watch. And when the time comes, the office door opened, the target emerged, moved down the corridor with casual confidence. Scarlett stood, began to follow, maintaining distance. Professional surveillance technique that would be invisible to anyone not trained to see it. When the time comes, she finished, we finish what others started. She disappeared into the crowd, just another contractor in another office building. Invisible, unremarkable, exactly what she needed to be, because that's what Reaper Queens did. They operated in shadows. They hunted in silence. They stood between evil and innocence, regardless of personal cost. And they always finished the mission. The hunt continued. Somewhere in North Carolina, a bronze plaque bore the name of the greatest warrior she'd ever known. A reminder that honor transcended death. That truth eventually prevailed. That sacrifice meant something. And in the shadows of power, another ghost moved toward reckoning with justice that had been 34 years delayed, but would not be denied. The legend of the Reaper Queen continued, written in classified files and whispered stories, never in official histories, because the most important victories were often the ones that prevented tragedies rather than responded to them. And those victories could only be achieved by warriors willing to be underestimated until the moment when estimation became irrelevant.